Peter.
Hi, Heather. We're it so far, huh?
How are you?
Doing good. Just busy as usual.
I'd imagine so.
Yeah, so this is being recorded right now.
You what?
This is being recorded right now, right?
Yeah, it is. Do you want me to stop it? I can pause recording. I started up because I forget sometimes when we immediately start and then I have to run behind the scenes and kind of get it going. So it's like, let me just start it from the beginning because, you know, it's a little easier.
So what actually gets published out there? You and I talking right now, or?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So the whole video gets published. I think under the records, unless we did like an executive session, which is where we'd go behind closed doors and talk about things that we don't want. There are certain things I guess the public doesn't have a right to know. But Jim seems like he wants everything to be public. So everything that people say is published online. So.
Yep. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, Jim.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Heather. Hi, Roberta. Hi, Ryan.
Hello.
Hey, Ryan.
Hi, everybody.
Good afternoon. Well, the whole group is here. Good to see everyone. Let's start off by we'll have our roll call. Peter Coughlin.
Here.
Roberta Manter.
Here.
Ryan Pelletier.
Here.
Silly, isn't it? But there we go, and I'm here too. So there we go. And Heather, thank you for putting this together and getting us a Zoom meeting. Let's add something to the agenda. We have Terms Committee meeting minutes that were put together from our September 7th meeting. Do we have a motion to add this to the agenda? I'll so move.
Second.
Okay. Ryan's hand went up before Roberta said second, so Ryan gets that one. All in favor? We're not going to do a roll call on this one. In minutes. Okay, unanimous. The reason for this afternoon's meeting was to follow up on our discussion that we had last time and to try to, with regard to terms, and try to see if there are some particular changes that we might recommend that the entire commission consider and incorporate into a recommendation to the legislature. So Pete has put together some changes. Roberta has put together some changes. I have. Can we start with Pete Coughlin's?
Yeah. So I was looking at public way, state highways, state townway, public roadway, and all those ones I could find. And the primary one is public way as defined in the Motor Vehicle Statutes 29A and also in the Title 23 Highway 1, which is really under the Maine Traveler Information. That's the old billboard law stuff. Mm-hmm. And they both kind of say the same thing, but they're slightly different. And for instance, under the 29A one, it references a way, which to me was okay as defined in 29A. But then all it says is which It talks about how it's maintained by the state, county, or town over which the general public has a right to pass. Period. Doesn't say anything about motor vehicles. It just, right to pass. That could be ride my horse or a car or whatever. Whereas the Title 23 one actually says capable of carrying motor vehicles and not limited to state roads, town roads, county roads, and other roads dedicated to the public. So what I did was that thing I sent this morning, I kind of combined them. I don't know if this is the right way to do it, but I kind of stuck with 29A1 and kind of added the 23 to it. So it talks about how it has a right to pass, but it's also capable of carrying motor vehicles. And then in Title 23, I just said C29A. Instead of having two that sound the same, but they're a little different. Then the other ones that were related, you might remember, to public safety and taxation and corrections and state of Maine property here. I thought because those are very specifically, narrowly defined, I don't think they cause a confusion problem. Yes, it's a public way, but it's really public property. And because it's specifically defined under those statutes, I figured let's just leave them alone because I don't think they're causing a problem. And then under public roadway, which is under the motor vehicle one again about bicycles, I just said, just go back to 29A definition. And town way really didn't change anything there. And then there was street or highway. That's also another definition in 29A. That's okay because it refers to a public way, which is defined, as I just said, in 29A up above that. And then state highway or highway, again, is under the Travel and Information Act. That's okay as it is because it refers to a public way, which goes back to that original definition. So I tried to consolidate so we have one definition of public way, and then refer things directly to it. I don't know if that's the right thing to do, if it's a legal thing to do, but it was trying to combine things into one place.
I have a couple of comments, but before we get into that, let's hear from Ryan and from Roberta as to your thoughts, your reactions to those ideas.
I have one thought on it, which is, does the term public roadway appear anywhere else where it would have to be changed to fit with the new definition of public way? And I just did a quick search on the legislative search site, and it comes up with 3 places where that term appears. 2 of them are in 29A. There's 2322 definitions, 2323 bicyclist and roller skier helmet use, passenger seat use. And then there's 30A section 4358 regulation of manufactured housing. I have not looked in them yet to see how often that term appears, but changing it in one place might mean changing it in all 4 of those so they all agree with each other.
Okay, Roberta, just a question of procedure there. What did you search under? You typed in public roadway under what?
I went to the legislative search page, statute search page.
Yeah.
And I just typed in quotation marks, public roadway.
All right.
And then search, and it came up with those 3.
That's what I thought I did, but maybe not.
We'll check on that one. That's a good thought. Ryan, we'll get you a good bite.
Roberta, just quickly name the 3 again. I got the 30A one, but the 2322 and
I've got 2322, 2323, and then the other one is in Title 30A, and it's 4358.
Yep. Okay, got them. I'll check them.
Yeah, as I'm thinking about the 4358 is probably requiring a permit to take a mobile home over a public way, and so it would be, it might say roadway. I think public way would work just as well, referring to the 29A definition, but I'll take a look at those too.
Yeah, okay.
Ryan, any thoughts?
Well, my thought is what Pete's done is exactly what we're charged to do, is try to clean this up. And I think he's done a great job of proposing some cleanup.
I agree that simplifying this is what the legislature wants and needs, and we want to help them out, so it's good. Pete, I'm going to make one suggestion.
Yeah, go.
To all of you. I like the idea of not having two definitions of public way. And so making that same definition of public way apply for the Maine Traveler Information Services, the billboard law makes sense. That's the basis for all municipal sign ordinances too, because you're able to, the idea is you're controlling signs because you're trying to keep from confusing drivers. And that's why the definition of public way under 1903 talks about motor vehicles. You're trying to regulate signs and billboards so that you're not distracting drivers on public roads. But I don't know that adding and is capable of carrying motor vehicles, including but not limited to any state highway, municipal road, county road, unincorporated territory road, or other road dedicated to the public, to the existing definition of public way does anything to it.
So I thought about that for 15 minutes, Jim, and I even reversed my thought and was going to go with 23 and tweak that and do away with 29A. But then I realized the difference between the two, because the 29A just says it talks about maintenance.
Well, owned and maintained.
Owned and maintained, and the general public has a right to pass. Doesn't say anything about motor vehicles at all. And I said, don't we want to include something about motor vehicles in here? Maybe not. I don't know.
Well, here's where I think we'll hit problems, and that is the definition of motor vehicles leaves out snowmobiles and motorized wheelchairs and ATVs. And so then we start saying that, gee, then on any public way, we can't have those vehicles. And that's why we had that problem with the public easement definition, the second one. So I would vote on doing what you're doing, using the term public way as defined in 29A 10159 throughout. But I would leave out that second clause so we don't cause any unintended problems.
Okay. You see what I did there? I just cut from 1903 and just stuck it up above.
Totally understood.
And I wanted this for discussion because I felt that was probably the best way, but that's why we're talking about this.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think, the idea is over which the general public has a right to pass. We're not limiting how the public can pass.
Oh, okay.
Walking, it could be by bicycle, it could be by motor vehicle, it could be by horse and cart. I mean, whatever your preference is, cross-country skis. That's the basic big picture definition.
Okay. Does that include ATVs and snowmobiles?
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a little bit different slant on it. Again, I agree that it would be best to have just one definition and make them agree with each other if possible. But sort of two thoughts here. One is it just says is capable of carrying motor vehicles. It doesn't say that that's the only thing it can carry. But the other thing is, are there any public ways that are not capable of carrying motor vehicles that this would then exclude? Are there, for example, would a hiking trail classify as a public way, or does a public way have to be something that's used by motor vehicles?
Well, right now, the definition up to the comma, where the general public has a right to pass, is what defines a public way for the state's highway laws, for its vehicle regulation laws.
Yeah, and the way I answer that too, Jim, is that if it's owned and actually maintained by DOT, a county, or a town, then obviously that has to meet certain standards, and so it's basically all roads that are open to motor vehicles.
But Roberta's got a fair question, and that is, does the public way, as it's defined under 29A right now, also include a hiking trail because it's a way owned and maintained by the state or by a town or city. And the general public has a right to pass, which is by walking or bicycling.
I'd go back to the definition of way because it says it means a way. And when you look at the definition of that, it refers directly to used for vehicular traffic.
There we go. Thank you.
And vehicular traffic is actually defined, the vehicle is defined in 29A.
And for the heck of it, let's look at it.
In that case, I don't see any problem with saying is capable of carrying motor vehicles, because and then it says but including but not limited to. Well, yeah, but then it's not saying that motor vehicles are including but not limited to. It's saying types of roads are including but not limited to. So I don't know if there's a way to say motor vehicles that the motor vehicles includes but is not limited to.
Yeah, you could see what I was thinking this morning.
Yeah. See why you go around and around on it.
Jim, in 29A, it's definition number 91 for vehicle.
Yeah, I was just having fun.
Oh, by the way, while you're looking that up, I went to that legislative search site again, and I went to the one that we're looking at, the 4358, and I typed in a Control F search for the term public roadway, and it only appears once, and that's in paragraph 3E, and it says a municipality shall not require road frontage on individual lots within a mobile home park that has the effect of requiring a manufactured home on the lot to be placed parallel to an adjacent private or public roadway.
Got it.
So I see no reason why that couldn't just be changed to public way.
Yeah, that works. And the definition of vehicle in the same section, 29A, as these other definitions of way and public way. Vehicle means a device for conveyance of persons or property on a way. Vehicle does not include conveyances propelled or drawn by human power or used exclusively on railroad tracks or snowmobiles or an electric personal assistive mobility device. So a bicycle, I guess, would not be that would be a conveyance propelled or drawn by human power. So a bicycle would not be a vehicle for purposes of and neither would a snowmobile or a wheelchair, a motorized wheelchair.
Right.
Okay. Which, that's what vehicular access means. I would vote in favor of just keeping the definition in 101 sub 59 public way as it is and not adding the and is capable of carrying motor vehicles. Because, as you point out, Pete, way means something that's used for vehicular traffic, so it would be redundant. True. And it could be confusing, potentially. The state Supreme Court has a way of reading too much into things. And by having motor vehicle there, it could be more of a problem than not.
Okay. See, I only spent 15 minutes. If I spent 16 or 17, I would have figured that out.
You would have gotten to the same place. All right. And so that basically would be using that public way definition consistently. I think that makes sense. Roberta will run down those other situations, and I think that will help.
Yep.
I'm sorry for the late memo, but I tried to keep it real brief because of it. I was looking at public easement. And I think the biggest issue with public easement is that we have two definitions, and it depends how you create it, which just seems really stupid, because there's no way that anybody in law enforcement can discern the difference between the two when you're out in the field. My recommendation is there's one definition of a public easement. It could be because a municipality wanted to provide access to a recreational facility for public access to land or water, and there isn't a way to get there otherwise from the main road. that it would be something created by private ways going back to Massachusetts and before 1976. It could be created by public easement after 1976 because we didn't call them public ways anymore, or private ways anymore. It could be a private way that would be created by layout or discontinuance before 1976. Any one of those would be a public easement, and it would make no difference how. There'd be no limitation on users. We wouldn't say, but if they were created after 1976 by a layout by the legislature, you couldn't use snowmobiles, ATVs, or wheelchairs on it. Doesn't make sense. It's a public easement. Let's use the term, use it across the board. However you create it under those ways, it is a public easement. So we have one term that we use. There may be differences of opinion as to what we do with a public easement, how it's maintained, what should be maintained for a level, what the liability is for maintaining a public easement, depending who does it. Roberta will have that discussion with us, I'm sure, on those issues. But I think my recommendation is just let's use one term, no matter how it was created. What do you think?
Well, I have a couple of problems with that. For one thing, the restriction on ATVs, we fought to get that in there because ATVs can do so much damage to a public easement that is not being maintained by the public. I don't know if there's some way to say that if it's to be used by ATVs, then the ATV club or somebody has to provide maintenance to see that they don't damage it. I don't know if that's a possibility.
Even an ATV could do a lot of damage to a publicly maintained road too, if it's a gravel road. That's most of these are.
That's true. And again, I've said this before, that the members of the ATV clubs are usually responsible and try to take good care of the trails. It's the road riders who are not members of the ATV club who don't care. And they'll go out when the roads are posted, closed for mud season. They'll go out and tear them up, or they'll scrub out. They'll do donuts in the middle of the road. They'll spew gravel every which way and tear it up. So the effort on the abandoned roads was, if these roads are no longer going to get any public maintenance, we need to protect them somehow. And that's why we worked hard to get ATVs excluded from those, which still leaves all the ones that are discontinued still being subject to being torn up.
Brian?
So that's a problem we need to look at.
Yeah, I agree with Roberta that it's a problem. I wonder though if there's a different way to address that issue, and I'm just thinking out loud here, so it might be way off base, but ATV trails cross private property too, and sometimes those rogue riders that Roberta's talking about damage private property. And what happens then is the private landowner says, enough's enough, I'm closing my road to that trail. So the issue on the public easement or on even a public road is, it would be right now, I assume, the municipal have the say to stop that road or that public easement as a trail. Am I right with that?
The municipality would have the right to be able to control the public access on it. So if there's still a public easement, in order to preserve the road, even if they aren't maintaining it.
Right. My question is, if it's a public easement and ATVs are using it and they're causing damage, does the municipal officers have the right to stop the ATVs from using that if there's a public easement? Or is it assumed that because it's public easement, anybody can go on it?
They can allow, anybody can go on it, but if somebody's damaging the road, they can do something. Roberta, what do you think?
Yeah, and the problem there is that they can do something, but will they? Because I know that there are towns where someone has said, please do not use this for ATVs. It's our access to our property. It's getting torn up. And the town has pretty much said, tough luck, we're designating it as an ATV trail. So and I can name you at least 2 or 3 cases where that has happened.
So that's where I think there needs to be a different answer for that type of situation. And And I'm trying to figure out what that might be without getting too complicated. But where, like I said a while ago, a private landowner can just say, you know, the trail's no longer going to pass on my private land. Who can we put in charge, if you will, of making the determination if an ATV trail has to be closed on a public easement? And would we be crossing a line by suggesting that we give the owners of the land that abut the public easement the ability to stop ATV trail use on a public easement?
I live in the house after that guy who wants to block the access, and I use an ATV to get to my house.
Yeah, I was thinking of it more of a vote of the majority. So if you have 10 landowners on a public easement, you get 10 votes, and 6 to 5 wins, whichever way. I'm just trying to see if there's a way to make both sides happy without getting the municipal community all riled up and saying that's taking local control away, because it's really not. It's just transferring the decision making to private landowners who abut the public easement, as opposed to the municipal officers who, you know, are elected by all the people in the town, not just those on that road, I guess.
You know, another way to do that too might be to say that right now the issue is for new public easements, snowmobiles and ATVs, and you could say that if there's an ATV club and a snowmobile club can apply for permission for it and its members to use a public easement. The problem is, you're a police officer, you see an ATV doing donuts out there, you have no clue. Is that person a member of a club? And even then, even if that person's a member of a club, if that person's damaging the road, you don't want that to happen. Right, Roberta?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's some way to put it in the hands of somebody that really can be impartial and say, yes, this is causing damage, or no, it is not causing damage. And the problem there is that you assign it to somebody who will do a good job with it now, and then maybe he retires and somebody else gets in whose sentiments are different. Or you can have a situation where you call somebody out to look at the damage, and at the time when they come, it doesn't look bad. But if they were able to respond instantly when the damage was there, they might get a different impression of it. So this one I think is going to take some more thought, but at least now we know what we have to think about.
Well, and I appreciate that. And the problem is, a lot of these towns that have these public easements are small towns. They do not have a police department. They rely on the county sheriff under agreement. And by the time the county sheriff comes in, or the state police officer comes in to take a look, that ATV is long gone. Those donuts are there. No one knows who did it, and it's a difficult time prosecuting it. So I understand the issue. And that can happen on a private road as well as that could happen on a public easement.
Yep, so, I've seen it done.
Yeah, so have I.
Do you guys, it seems that the few records of discontinuances that I've had come in here, it seems that there seems to be a majority of towns that when they go through the discontinuance process, they choose to leave a public easement for whatever reason. And I've always wondered why. You're discontinuing this thing, you're getting rid of the maintenance, it really doesn't go anywhere, yet we're going to keep a public easement. And I've always wondered, why not just revert to the abutters?
I think I can answer that. And this goes back to something that I've told the legislature for years, which is that there are 3 solutions to discontinued roads, and all 3 of them are unconstitutional. The old way was when they discontinued a road, it ceased to be a road. And the problem with that is that it meant that the land in front of each property reverted to the individual property owners. And so the 2 guys at the entrance to the road still had access from the main road, but everybody behind them was landlocked. And when you damage somebody's access, you have to compensate them for the loss of access. And towns didn't want to have to compensate them. And then what some towns and counties did was they started the practice of retaining a private way subject to gates and bars, or just a private way, whether or not subject to gates and bars. And the intent seems to have been, from language I've seen in town reports and such, the intent seems to have been to preserve access for the property owners, not for the general public. But the problem with that is that you cannot take private property and give it to another private property owner. That's a taking of private property for private use, which is unconstitutional. So then they came up with the idea of public easements. And the problem with public easements is that then the general public gets to use it and doesn't have any obligation to maintain it. And as you said, what's the point in keeping a public easement if they're trying to get rid of the road? So that was why I pushed for the option of allowing the property owners to voluntarily grant each other private easements. And if we could get that to work, I think it might be the best solution. But it's run into some snags. If you can get the private landowners to realize that your choice is we have to keep some kind of access to those other lots. If you will not agree to keep private access, then we've got to keep a public easement. And then everybody and his brother can use it 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, no matter what the conditions are, and they have no obligation to maintain it. Or if you can agree to work it out with the other landowners on the road, then it's limited to just their use. You can set up a road association if you need to see that it gets properly maintained and makes everybody responsible for it. So that, if it would work, would kind of be an ideal solution. The problem is convincing all the landowners that that is the best solution, because the two at the entrance of the road often will say, I have no stake in it. I don't need access. I'm just shutting it off. Or they can just not agree to grant private easements. So it's a little bit sticky in the workings of it, but if we could educate people more on how it should work, that might be an option. The key to it is that it has to be voluntary, because if it's voluntary, then it doesn't violate the Constitution. If you tell them they have to, then it's unconstitutional.
Brian.
I've never, in my role as a town manager, ever, closed or discontinued a road that had people living on it. I just want to put that out there. But in the roads that we did discontinue, that there were no residents, they just were old roads that had been established probably 100 years ago, and we really truly had no reason to continue to have them. I think I did 3 in the last 20 years or so. All 3 of them, we retained the public easement. And I'll admit that we retained that public easement for the sole purpose of, just in case, for recreational trail use.
So that's a third reason.
They're not being used. They're not being used as recreational trails. But at the time when we discontinued, that was the thought process of the elected officials. Maybe the ATV club or the snowmobile club might need that down the road, in the future.
Sure.
And that's why it was kept.
Yeah, this gets into another thing. When a town keeps an easement, sometimes it's because the town really does still have an interest in keeping that road. And if so, then why would they be discontinuing it? Shouldn't they be hanging on to it? And I had another thought, and it ran out of the other side of my head.
Let me try to answer Pete's question from my perspective. Why would the town retain anything if it's trying to get rid of the road? And I agree with Roberta in the sense of if somebody has property on a road, you probably don't have an easement, a private easement to get there over that road in your deed. If you bought a farmhouse that was built back in 1888 or something, and your road gets discontinued, you have no way to get there unless some public right is retained, because you don't have something in your deed to give you access over Roberta and David's land to get there. There's nothing in your deed. So if there isn't a public easement retained, you can't get there. Whether someone's living there or not, it could be a woodlot, it could be a house. It's your property, you can't get there, and it's landlocked. So that's one reason. And so, and the other reason is that it might be a house and you're providing some access. But it isn't just the worry about creating landlocked lots, it's the worry about having to pay damages. Once upon a time it was a road. It may have made sense once upon a time. There may have been people living out there a long time ago. but they may have left. And there's a whole swath of Maine where people left after the 1930s. And it reverted to basically farm and forest land, open space. The houses were abandoned. The road wasn't used. And in those cases, though, you still owe damages if you take property. You're taking a right. You're taking a right of public access when you discontinue that road. And so either you don't want to create landlocked lots, and or you don't want to pay damages. You want to pay $1 damage for discontinuing this road because you're doing everyone a favor by discontinuing public need to maintain it. Because if you have a town way, there's that positive obligation to keep it safe and convenient for passage by motor vehicle. And you can wind up being taken before the county commissioners and ordered to fix that road if you don't do it. So municipalities want to discontinue the road in order to get rid of that affirmative obligation that state law places on them. But if where no one's using that road. So you don't want a landlocked lot, you want to get rid of the obligation to maintain because no one's using it anymore, and you don't want to get sued for unconstitutional taking without payment of just compensation. So you pay nominal damages because you're keeping a public right to get there. What Roberta would say is it's nice that you're keeping that right, but if you don't maintain it, it's no good to me. And what the law does is permit the town's legislative body to decide whether and when it will maintain that road and to what level. And then, you have to go to town meeting or you have to go to the city council every year in order to get them to try to get them to do it, right?
Yeah, and I remembered my other thought and a couple of others as well. Trying to get them to agree to maintain a public easement, even though they have the right to, is extremely difficult because the people say, well, if we fix that road, it's going to increase our taxes. And it's very hard to convince them that it's much easier for a town as a whole to put a little bit of money into a road than it is for one person to put money into a road so that the rest of the public can use it.
Well,
so, for example, on our road, it costs us about $2,000 a year. It costs us about $2,000 a year to keep the road passable to our house. And if we've got 2,000 residents in the town, it would increase each of their taxes by $1 if all they had to do is keep it passable, which is one of the reasons we've gone for minimum maintenance roads. But to get into the other thoughts that I was thinking of, one is that if you do go to the effort of having all the landowners come to an agreement, draw up deeds ready to be filed with the registry of deeds that will say that each of them grants the other an easement in common, then it still has to go to a vote of the town. And the town can say, after all these people have gone to all that effort, they can say, no, we're not giving it up. We might want that someday as a recreational trail. Then another thing you get into is that if you look at Brown versus Warchalowski, it says that a public easement may not constitutionally be laid out unless there is a real and actual public need for the road. So then you get into abandonment. In order to prove a road abandoned, you have to prove that the public hasn't needed it for the last 30 years. And as a consequence of that, it automatically becomes a public easement. So how can you say that because we haven't needed it, now it's something that we can only establish if there's a need for it? And then the third thought that I had is that these properties do belong to somebody, even if they haven't used them for years, they haven't visited them for years, they haven't logged them, they haven't done anything with it, but it's still their land. And they may think, well, if my child or my grandchild wants to move to the country, wouldn't it be great if they could build a house on this land? Well, now you've just continued the road. How are they going to get there?
But if you keep the public easement, they can, which actually works mischief because then you have people building new houses, getting building permits on roads that were not intended to be maintained by the town. Yeah, you can't get there from here becomes the issue. Well, my first thought on this one is just combining the definitions of public easement and then working from there. I think Roberta has the further concern of public easements and the fact that the public doesn't maintain them necessarily. And so people who own properties on those are at a disadvantage. You can't convince town meeting to fix your road, but you're on a public easement and you don't have a private easement right to get there. How do you get to use that road? You have to maintain it yourself, is what it comes down to. And then if you do, then you have liability for the work that you do.
And that's where I'd say that the Maine Roadways motto is build a better public easement and the world will beat the pathway to your door. So for example, on our road, when my husband bought the property, which still had a house on it, by the way, a livable house, when he bought it, he had to fold in the side mirrors and use the winch to get through in 2 spots in August because the road was so bad. But he started fixing the road up so that he could get in and out more easily. And as soon as he did, everybody else says, oh, great, now we can get into our property to cut off our timber. Now we can get into this road to use it as a shortcut across town. Now we've got a place where we can go mud running. Everybody else sees that the road is now passable and they use it. So you're no longer maintaining it for yourself, you're maintaining it for the public. Let
me ask a question, because whether the road is a public easement or a private road with no public rights on it, 4 or more property owners along that road can form a road association. Have you ever tried doing that on your road?
Okay, here's where we get into what I call the Abraham Lincoln argument. Suppose Abraham Lincoln had said slavery is
wrong. Wait a minute, does this mean I get assassinated?
I hope not.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, even with the beard.
Okay.
No, what if Abraham Lincoln had said slavery is wrong? We should not be compelling these people to work themselves to the bone for somebody else's benefit for no pay. That just isn't right. But I've got a solution to it. We'll just buy in 10 times as many slaves and divide up the workload. So when you put together a road association on a public easement, what you're saying is, okay, we shouldn't make this poor guy maintain the road by himself, so we'll make everybody else on the road share in maintaining it for the public. That's still a taking of private funds for a public purpose. You're taking their gravel, you're taking their culverts, you're taking all the work that they've put into the road to make it passable for themselves, and you're giving that to the public without compensating the person for all their effort and materials.
Jim, do you have any idea how this works in New Hampshire or Vermont?
Yeah, in New Hampshire they have class 6 roads or something or other. I forget how many numbers there are, but there's a road that's very similar in New Hampshire. And in Vermont, they have roads that are designated as trails. And my best friend from when I was growing up lives on one of these roads that was designated a trail. And every couple of years, the logger who owns the property behind them comes in and uses the road until they've souped it up so much that they can't get through with their trucks. And then they drive across your lawn.
So I've heard you mention the term minimum maintenance roads as in terms of a type of public easement. Like if there's a, I don't know whether that would be for all public easements or for those public easements which are not maintained by the town.
Yeah, basically what it would say is that the way things are now, there is a standard to which townways are supposed to be kept.
Right.
The state has their standards that they recommend, and most towns adopt those standards. And it includes, so many inches of substrate, so many inches of gravel, so many inches of paving, so many feet wide, crown, ditches, the whole shebang, which is expensive. And when you have a road that hasn't been maintained since maybe 1904, it's going to cost the town an arm and a leg to put it back in that condition.
Right.
But if you just have somebody who has a house and they just would like to be able to get there, but it's a public easement, so every time they fix it themselves, the public tears it up again and they end up rebuilding the road again. How about saying that you can have a minimum maintenance road? And that means that if the public is going to keep an easement on it, and the public is going to grant them a building permit to build their house on it, and the public is going to tax them as having residential property on this road, then the public needs to at least keep the road passable enough so that they can get to their residence. And minimal maintenance is something that we could work on how it would be defined. I know that in other states that have minimum maintenance roads, they will not allow a road to be decreased to that status if anyone lives on it, because their feeling is that it needs more than minimal maintenance if somebody lives there.
Okay.
But here in Maine, we can have discontinued roads with people living on them. There are even some. Oops.
Let's get
We lost our recording.
I think Heather must have dropped off for just a few minutes. That's fine. Okay.
Should I continue or wait?
Well, I want to try to refine what you're saying just a little bit, just big picture. Would all public easements be minimum maintenance roads, or would only those public easements on which people are living or get a building permit become minimum maintenance roads?
It would be something that would be designated on a case-by-case basis or road-by-road basis. And the definition that we suggested would be that there would be 3 requirements. 1 is that someone actually lives on it. 2 is that they were granted a building permit for the place where they're living. And 3 would be that they are taxed as having residential property. If those 3 things exist, then they would be required to provide at least minimal maintenance.
Okay,
if those things don't exist.
If I live in a farmhouse that didn't get a building permit when it was put up in 1875, I couldn't do anything. I wouldn't be entitled to this.
Well, I suppose if you did enough of a building improvement that it required a building permit, then that might qualify.
Okay, I'm not trying to be a pain in the neck. I'm just trying to think of the idea.
But it also leaves a loophole for the town. If the town says, okay, you can live out there, but we're not going to charge you as if it's a residence. We're just going to continue charging what we were charging when it was just a woodlot. And if they do that, then the people are saving enough on their taxes that maybe they've got some money to put into the road.
That you're not going to be able to get through, because that goes right in violation of the Constitution of Maine. Now we're outside of statute. You gotta tax everybody equally, regardless of whether if there's a house there, you gotta tax it as a house.
But if the house has no access, what use is it?
It doesn't matter though. The Constitution says you have to tax it. I mean, it's not like you can just waive that away.
I know people have made the argument that I don't even have a public easement to get to my house. I don't have any kind of way to get there, so it's worth less. And go get your real estate appraiser and come back and show me that your property's been devalued, and maybe you'll get an abatement. Maybe.
Yeah, I know Rebecca said something about there being a clause in the taxation laws that says that there's supposed to be a discount if it's on a road that isn't maintained. And I know cases where that doesn't seem to be applied, where people have gone to the town and said, how much of a discount do I get because it's a discontinued road? And the town says, oh no, we tax everybody equally no matter what kind of a road they're on. These people, the people that are getting no maintenance for their road currently, so I said other states don't allow that, but I think the people that currently are getting no maintenance for the road would be happy if all they got was grading once or twice a year and a load of gravel in the worst mud hole each year. And if that was done, eventually they would have a halfway decent road, and it wouldn't be costing the town an arm and a leg to do it.
I think the difficulty is going to be getting what a definition of minimum maintenance is. You just expressed it, but I don't know if everyone would agree, that that's what it is. And I think the other part of it is, if you were to offer that to municipalities, you already have public easements established. Would you say that who's going to make the determination of which public easements become minimum maintenance roads?
The ones that have somebody living on them and being taxed as being a residential property.
Okay, so by operation of law, the legislature would pass that bill. It becomes law, and by operation of law, anything that fits those 3 definitions, a portion of the road to the nearest residence perhaps, or whatever, would wind up, or the entire road would wind up being a minimum maintenance road. You know what the fiscal note would look like for local governments on that bill? It'd be a lot. I couldn't tell you how much, but Ryan might have a pretty good guess from just his towns.
I mean, you know, there's different ways to try to determine that. You could take what each town spends on their public roads and divide it out by mile, and then multiply that number by however many public easements miles you have. You could go to Pete and say, how much do you give every town for local road money? Use that per mile amount. I mean,
yeah, and discount it for the fact that you're not doing the full maintenance that you would to keep it safe and convenient, the way that state law would make you do for a townway.
It wouldn't have to be the whole road. It would be the road to the person's residence.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that when a property has been, say, in tree growth, you're not taking in much tax money for that road. But when one of those properties gets converted from tree growth to being a residential property with a nice house on it, all of a sudden you're getting a lot more tax revenue. And if you took even a fraction of that tax revenue and put it back into the road, that could cover the cost.
Well,
But I could see a lot of these overgrown, discontinued public easements that exist now with not a house on them, and the way people are buying property now and building up in places that we never would have. Now you get an overgrown thing with two wheel paths going through it, and they want minimal maintenance. That's going to cost a hell of a lot of money to just grade it and occasionally fill big holes, because they're really going to have to grade the road to remove all the sod and everything else.
So there's another question is, should towns be granting building permits on roads like that? In some cases, the town will say that the property has to have so many feet of road frontage before they'll grant a building permit. Does that count as road frontage or not? And in some towns, they say, yes, a public easement counts as road frontage. And in other towns, they're trying to say that it doesn't. So that's another thing that would have to be looked at.
larger communities are more likely to assess impact fees. Smaller towns don't do that. So, you know.
Some towns don't even have building permits.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, you have to have a CEO if you're over 2,000 population. So, and that's only half of Maine communities. So, it is difficult, as Pete notes. The cost of land is driving people to buy in areas that you normally wouldn't have seen developed. Well, I've seen this happen. You know, I saw this happening 30 years ago when I was working at private practice, 20 years ago working at Maine Municipal. Well, I'm not sure how well, it's going to be expensive when you come up with this idea of creating minimum maintenance roads and saying anybody who lives on it. Maybe you'd have to say anyone who has a building permit as of a specific date, which doesn't help going forward. But if anyone who has a building permit on a road that is discontinued as of this date, that's one way to do it and try to limit how many people get affected. But this is going to have a big fiscal note, and it will trigger the municipal mandate law, and the state would have to refund a good portion of that municipal mandate, which the state won't want to do. I see what's going to happen if you propose this. The funding of it, the cost of it is going to kill it. So.
I still wonder about getting some of the funding from that increased tax revenue, though, particularly where you have a road like ours where now there are 6 houses on one end of the road and a dozen houses on the other end of the road, and this was all woodlots.
Yeah. Jim, do you think it would at least be worth trying to determine how many miles of public easements we actually have in Maine where this idea would be applied?
But it would only apply to the ones with houses on them.
Right, but to find that out, we'd have to ask the municipalities.
Right, and the municipalities would have to know what roads they maintain are townways and what roads they maintain are public easements.
Or don't maintain that are public easements.
Well,
Be careful of the word maintain. Maintain can mean to allow to exist, or it can mean to take care of it. So I
Right.
try to avoid the word maintain whenever possible.
True enough, Pete's map doesn't talk about public easements versus town ways. It talks about publicly maintained roads.
Right.
So that's not going to give us the answer. You'd have to actually do a survey of each town's public works department, perhaps, and they might not even know.
Nope.
Okay.
Roberta, where would you find in a particular town any of the roads that have been discontinued up to this point? Where do you go? The county or?
You go to Maine Roadways, and I spend hours and hours researching it for you. One suggestion that has come up is, can we get a funded position to do that research? I know back in the late 70s, early 80s, the DOT Division of Rights of Way did that for county roads. They went out to each county and they went through the county commissioner's record books and they copied out everything they found that had to do with the road, whether it was a layout of a road, a petition having to do with the road, closing of a road, discontinuance of a road, and they cataloged all of them. And if we could do the same thing for town report. Go ahead.
Roberta, let me add that was done for specific DOT purposes. It wasn't just done because they wanted to go out and catalog all these county roads. It was because a lot of these are affected by adjacent state highways and they needed that information. So they did it to supplement the state highway assets. So it wasn't just to go out and catalog these for the heck of it. It was done for the state system.
I realize that. If I can read you an email here that I just got. By the way, today I've gotten 4 road complaints. 3 of them I think are new ones. Anyway, I've been back and forth with Kyle McLagan at the DOT Division of Rights of Way. He's my go-to person when I want the records on a discontinued county road. And the way I find those is first I go to the DOT public map viewer and I go on the layers and I click on rights of way and it will tell me which roads used to be county ways. And often it will have a D next to the code number, which means it was discontinued. And so then what I do is I email the code number to Kyle and he sends me back a copy of the commissioner's order so I can look at it and see whether the wording said anything about retaining an easement or not. So recently, one of the people that I've been in contact with about a road, she got in touch with him and he sent her back the town records on it. And I said, wow, does the DOT have these town records? And I asked him and he said, no, unfortunately, they have a few, but not very many. And so I've been kind of conversing with him about it. And I said that wouldn't it be great if we could get somebody to do the same thing for the town road records as they did for the county road records? And he wrote back this morning, I just got this. He says, I have had a similar thought. It seems like more and more I hear from people reaching out for right-of-way information that it is a struggle to get what they need from towns. I would think it would be a huge benefit to both the state and the towns if that information could be compiled somewhere. I would think here. I think funding and staffing are probably the biggest issues. I think it would be interesting to go through some towns' records, but I can barely keep up with what I have here. Sometimes mappers get a chance to go out to the towns and check what they have, but if anything, they probably only bring back what pertains to their project in their area. A former state employee that comes in from time to time mentions that UMO is trying to compile all town meeting records. But I also thought he said that wouldn't necessarily include outcomes, just proposals. I'm a big advocate for compiling information in an easily consumable way, but it's quite an initial investment. And what he says about it not necessarily including outcomes, that's true. What I find, I end up going to the Maine State Library a lot because lots of times towns are less than agreeable about having you go through their town reports. But the state library has a pretty complete collection of town reports. Towns are supposed to send them to them every year. Some are better about it than others. But I go down to the state library. I call in advance because with their being in temporary quarters, they have much of the stuff in remote storage. So I'll call and I'll put in an order for the town reports from a particular town. And then I will sit there and just go through the town warrant. And what I will do is I will copy down any record that I found of a road being laid out or altered or discontinued or closed or whatever. And I note down the town, the year of the town warrant, the article number, and basically what road it had to do with, if it's identified in any way that you can tell. Sometimes it says from, Smith's barn to the big oak tree. But I'll note down whatever it says. And then that doesn't tell you what the result of the vote was. So to get the result of the vote, then you have to go back to the town and ask them. But if you know which article and which year, that's not too burdensome a request that any town should refuse it, because you can say, I need the result of the vote on Article 57 in 1943. And they should be able to find that for you if the record still exists. In some cases, the towns will say, oh, our records were destroyed in a fire. And then who knows? But at least if you can find the article, then you know where to look for the result of the vote.
So you're pitching for a job with MDOT to compile this information. That's
Well, the other thought that I've had is crowdsource it. See if you can get somebody from each town to agree to do it for their own town. And it is kind of fun. It's like playing history detectives. And I know there are a few towns that have done it. Let's see, I know that Dixfield has done it, Fayette has done it. What was the one I was just looking at? Was it Newport? Searsport has done it. And I just ran across one yesterday going through some of my files looking for something else. I found where there's another town that's done it, and I can't remember off the top of my head now which town it was. But there are
recommending this sort of road inventory, that municipalities do a road inventory, but when you require the towns to do a road inventory, that's when hackles are raised. When you start hearing about, and I understand your point that if these roads are maintained better, then the taxes will go up and it'll pay for itself. But all they're going to look at is, this is going to cost me X number of dollars. And by the way, it's the state making me do this, and so it's an unfunded state mandate. So 2/3 of the legislature will act and override the state mandate, and it will wind up being on the municipal property taxpayer. That's the way this movie usually goes.
So I figure there are two alternatives. One is to get a state-funded position to do the job, and the other is to crowdsource it. And I think if we could get in touch with town historical societies, the people that tend to be members of historical society love digging into history, and they might be the perfect people to do this kind of a search.
Yeah, just a lot less official if it's done on a crowdsourced basis than it is if it's done by a state agency.
Yeah, but it's better than nothing. It's a start.
I agree. And but Pete, what would happen if this position were to be wrapped into the next DOT budget?
Well, I can, I'm not going to talk about personnel stuff here, but my guess is that has probably got a 0 chance of getting funded and created. I mean, Kyle can say that, but they didn't even really want me to be on this commission, because it really has nothing to do with DOT. It's really all about local road stuff. But because it was roads, they wanted someone from DOT on it. So I'm trying to spend minimal time involved with this commission. But if we were to suggest that a position be created up in our property office to do what Kyle's saying, I don't think that's got a chance of going anywhere. Maybe I'm wrong, because I don't work up there, but I highly doubt it.
Well, then we're back to volunteers.
Yep.
If we can't, I understand the frustrations, but I don't think that this would pass either at the DOT level or making each municipality do this. What could help in the short haul is to limit the liability of people who, like you and David, maintain a public easement for your own use and other people use it. You certainly don't want to be sued for maintaining something that other people are using that you're paying for. That's a total indignity. And so it seems that if you maintain it to some common sense, reasonable standard, that you ought to at least be exempt from liability to third persons who use that road. Is that something that, I think that's something that this legislature could pass?
That certainly would be a help. It doesn't take care of the expense of maintaining it day to day, but at least it would help to know that you're not going to be sued if something isn't exactly right. There have been situations, for example, where we had an ice storm and we don't have a sander truck, and there's no way that we can sand the whole road by hand. So I've slipped and fallen on the road. David has slipped and fallen on the road. He slipped last winter and whanged his head so hard he's still recovering from the concussion. But if somebody else came in and slipped on it, then are we going to be blamed for it because we plowed it? And if we hadn't plowed it, they wouldn't have tried to come in.
But if you hadn't plowed it, you wouldn't have been able to go in. I get it. So if there's some way of saying that if you're taking reasonable action in the work that you do or your contractors do, then your liability, you're protected from liability. It's only if you do something unreasonable, create a hazard, that there'd be potential liability. And that's what happens for recreational easements. I can let people on my property, and in order to create an incentive for me to let people hike on my property, the legislature has limited liability for recreational access. If I don't charge someone and I don't create a huge hazard, I don't put a pit with a net over it or something like that, or I don't put a spring gun or something on my property, then I'm immune from liability generally for letting people on to hike. I think that's something that's doable. If the cost concern, it doesn't reach, but you could help control the cost if you formed a road association. And I know your objection to it. I understand. This is something you think the town should be doing because it's a public easement, but you could form the road association and at least share the costs with the people who are on your road using it.
Yeah, I think what can be done there is you can have a voluntary road association where people say, look, we're sick of trying to get through the mud. We'll pitch in a load of gravel. And we have done that on our road. In fact, we just did kind of a major project that way because the road was getting so bad. But I don't think you can use a statutory road association because it forces people to pitch in. And I don't think you can force people to use their private funds to maintain a public road. I think that violates the Constitution. So it would have to be voluntary, and that's going to be voluntary, i.e. grudgingly. Another thought that I've had is, can we just post signs? And not saying it has to be required, but can we somehow allow for people to post a sign either that says, similar to the equine professional limited liability, which says that warning, an equine professional has limited liability for an injury or death resulting from the inherent risks of equine activities. Can you post a sign that says, warning, the landowners have limited liability for an injury or death occurring due to the condition of this road? Or can you post a sign, another one that I've suggested is warning, damaging a public easement with a motor vehicle is a Class E crime. And, hope that makes people think twice before they use it for mud running.
We could probably put warning signs that would be like a billboard at the front, but then we'd violate the billboard law. But yeah, I mean, within reason, I think you could put warnings up at the front of one of these roads. Okay. Well, I think we've hashed out a bunch of those issues, and there's one other brief issue that I raised, and it's not necessarily, well, it kind of is within terms, just not the terms the legislature gave us. Remember, we talk all the time about, I like the warning sign, that's nice, bright orange. Well, I can't read the fine print, unfortunately, it's blurring.
See if I hold it still long enough, whether it will clear up.
Yeah, we'll see. Stop shaking. No, it's not clearing up.
No, I can read it to you. It says, warning, road not maintained at public expense. Damaging a public easement with a motor vehicle is a Class E crime. And then at the bottom in fine print, it says Title 17, Maine Revised Statutes, Section 3853D.
I like it. It's what every public easement should be wearing this season. All right. When we talk about public easements are the leftovers in part. If they weren't laid out to get crops to market or for a recreational easement, they're leftovers from statutory abandonment or discontinuance. But the statutory abandonment statute was amended recently, 3028A. And when it was amended, it talks now about discontinuance by abandonment. No, they are two different things. A discontinuance is when you have a hearing and you have an order of discontinuance and you pay damages and there's a legislative body, the town meeting or the city or town council, that approves it and awards damages and a certificate's recorded in the registry. That's a discontinuance. It's a formal process. Abandonment just happens because the public doesn't use a road for 20 consecutive years or more, or the public doesn't pay to maintain a town way for 30 consecutive years or more. It just happens. The result is the same as a discontinuance, but it is not a discontinuance by abandonment. You've got, the formal process by an informal. No, they're two different things. Maybe that's just me, but that seems to be mixing up two terms that are very separate. And I would just like to clean that up and just say that, there's an abandonment by statute, there's a common law abandonment, and the abandonment by statute has the same effect as a discontinuance. Just clean it up.
Well, if you go back to the original Section 3028, when it was passed in 1976, what it said was, it shall be prima facie evidence that a town or county way established prior to January 1st, 1946, and not kept passable for the use of motor vehicles at the expense of the municipality or county for a period of 30 or more consecutive years next prior to January 1st, 1976, has been discontinued by abandonment.
Yeah, I know.
That's where it came from.
It's presumed abandoned, and then it's subject to people litigating it.
Yeah. And then the question is, if there's a road that never has been litigated and never has been addressed, can you presume that it is abandoned? Because I know a bunch of roads that would apply to. Mm-hmm. And trying to get anybody to agree that it's presumed abandoned when there's no declaration by the selectmen. And yet people will say there doesn't have to be a declaration by the selectmen. So now can you say that a road was presumed abandoned under the old law but never recorded, and because it was not maintained for 30 years from 1920 to 1950, that it's now presumed abandoned and is there for a public easement?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't go back any earlier than 1946, which is the first period of time that the presumed abandonment statute covered. I wouldn't go back any further than that one because I think that would be a problem.
That raises another issue. Maine Municipal Association has said that any road that was abandoned before 1965 doesn't keep a public easement, but after 1965, a road that was abandoned does keep a public easement. Yeah. Because Section 3028 refers to 3026, the discontinuance law was changed. But they missed the fact that it says that a road that was abandoned pursuant to this statute takes on the same status that would have had after discontinuance. And you can't abandon it by that statute before it existed.
Right, because the earliest you could have abandoned that by that statute is 1976, which is 12 years after that law, the 65 change you were talking about. Right. You're absolutely right. It's something that probably should be corrected in future editions of that Maine Roads Manual. So to clarify that issue. let's just put this one on the parking lot. I understand, but I just wanted to flag that issue just because it's the sort of thing that grates at me because it mixes up two terms that have very distinct usages. Roberta, you had some comments that you've sent to us. You cited it was a work in progress with regard to the private way revisions and the roads revisions. Where do you want to start?
Let's take the private roads ones first, because I think that's the easier of the two.
Okay.
Which one,
And
Roberta? Roads or ways?
Private roads.
Okay.
Okay.
Just the one you gave us copies of this?
I just emailed this just before the meeting. You should find it in an email. There's an email with 2 attachments.
Yeah, is this different than what you'd sent us before?
Yeah, this is actually trying to make corrections where possible.
Yeah, the last one was notes on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
This
Alrighty.
one still has some of the notes in it, but it also has where I would suggest what could be done about it.
Okay.
Okay. The operation of a snowmobile, I think the only thing that really needs to be clarified there is that it talks about when the public way has been closed. And then it does say in accordance with Title 23, Section 2953, but not everybody's going to bother to go look that up. And I know of at least one town that says, oh yeah, we closed that road, therefore it's now open to ATVs and snowmobiles. And that's not what it says. It says if it's closed to winter maintenance. And I think the simple fix to that would be just to insert in it, closed to winter maintenance in accordance with Title 23, Section 2953. And that would clarify that. Any comments on that?
Sounds good. Sounds like a reviser office thing.
Okay. Then the next one, operation of ATVs. My suggested revision is unlawfully operating an ATV on a private road. A person may not operate an ATV upon a private road except as follows. A, the owner, in parentheses S, because it's often owned by a road association or a bunch of people. The owners of the private road may grant written permission for the road to be used as an ATV trail. And my questions on that is, would permission be granted to the local ATV club or to agriculture and forestry? Who would that written permission be given to? B, the members of a road association responsible for maintenance of the private road may by majority vote grant permission for the road to be used as an ATV trail. C, the owners of a private road or the members of a road association responsible for maintenance of the private road may agree to use the road or designated portions of the road by ATVs by other abutting landowners, not the general public. And D, an owner of abutting land may use the road with an ATV where the road abuts his own property and may use the road with an ATV for access to his property with permission of the other abutting landowners. So this was one of the problems that came up. Ryan, I forget whether it was you or whether it was Brian Bronson who was saying, what about landowners? Are they prohibited from using the road by ATVs? So I think that would clarify it. Any comments on that one? Okay, we probably should run that one by Brian and see what he says about it. Then the next one is where it really gets problematic. As used in this chapter, Traveler Information Services, private way means a private road, driveway, or public easement as defined in Section 3021. This definition says that privately owned roads and driveways are the same as public easements. They are not, since the owner of a private road or driveway can restrict public use, but public easements are open to public use.
Well,
so that one I didn't get around to coming up with a real solution for it.
Here's the thought. This is a sign law, basically regulating signs because they can be seen from a public way. And so that's why you have the difference, public way and private way. I think in this one, it isn't a problem to include public easement within it, because the public easement may or may not be publicly maintained. It's maintained to a lower level. You're not worried, frankly, you're not worried about the glare from the road sign of Home Depot on the side of a public easement. That, you're not worried about road signage distracting drivers on public easements. It's just, it's not going to happen realistically. I'm not going to put my changeable LED sign on a public easement. My business isn't going to be there. That's going to justify that kind of thing.
Okay, can we change the definition somehow so that it says that there are two different things here and that the law applies to both of them instead of lumping them both together as one thing?
Well, it's as used in this chapter, so it's regarding road signs, basically, traveler information services. As used in this chapter, private way means private road, driveway, or public easement. Anything that's not a public way, because the definition of public way, remember, is owned and maintained by the state, county, or local government. And public easement is not owned or maintained.
So Jim,
Okay,
is this the same thought process I had where the public way definition used for public safety, taxation, corrections, DHHS, it's all specific to that
Right.
particular title. So leave it alone because it really doesn't affect anybody.
Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Okay, what I may need to do is look and see where that term is used in that chapter
Yeah.
Okay.
and see how it applies.
And see if it
Right.
causes any mischief. Fair enough.
Okay, I'm going to just make myself a note here. That means I have to go back to my version of it instead of the PDF version. Private roads, okay. Excuse me while I just make a quick note on that one then. Okay, check where term applies in that chapter. Okay. Okay, then go back to private roads. Okay, responsibility for cost of repairs and maintenance of private roads that benefit residential properties. This one has been a big problem also because what happens is that the realtor depends on the seller to tell them what the status of the access is, and lots of times the seller gets it wrong, whether it's intentional so they can sell their property or whether they just don't know any better or whether they've been told misinformation. So that one's going to take some work. How can we make sure this is only applied to actual privately owned roads and does not give the buyer a false assurance when in fact it's private property and there is no road, or in fact it's a public easement, so a road association will force the abutters to maintain a public road at private expense? Can we require the realtor to obtain assurance in the form of a subdivision plan or information from E911? This will not and cannot solve the problem for discontinued roads that are public easements. Maybe loans should not be granted for properties on such roads, but often veterans find such properties to their liking. So again, that one's going to take some work.
Well,
Next, yeah, go ahead.
The quick one, with regard to realtors and we've got the disclosure law. One thought we'd had and kicked the tires on at the end of last year and beginning of this year was tie in that realtor disclosure to MDOT's map viewer, which will at least tell the buyer
Right.
that a road is publicly maintained.
Right.
Now,
Mhm.
could be a public easement with lower level of maintenance. It could be a town way, but at least there would be a resource for people to look at to say it's publicly maintained, and that could go on the disclosure statement. That's a more easily objectively answered question.
Okay.
Right now, people are checking no because they don't have a clue and no one wants to commit.
Well, we find that checking unknown isn't as much of a problem because at least that flags the buyer to say, maybe this is something I'd better look into. And then they call me.
Well, that's it. Then you wind up being the resource.
Right. But what's a real problem is where they say, oh, yes, that's a privately owned road and the maintenance is shared by the abutters. And that's total news to the abutters. They had no idea they were sharing in maintenance and they have no intention of sharing in the maintenance. And sometimes it isn't even a shared private road. Sometimes it's discontinued and there is no road. Okay, then the next one, 3121. Responsibility for cost of repairs and maintenance to repairs to and maintenance of private roads that benefit residential properties. And this one, the intent of it was to, this is the same one. The intent of it was to make sure that somebody is going to be maintaining the road so that it remains passable. And another problem that's come up with this is that we got them to change it so the first line there says if more than one property shares a common benefit from a private road, each property owner is responsible for a share. They did have it that each residential property owner will share. And the problem with that is that if you have one residence and the rest are woodlots or a gravel pit or a lumber yard or a rock quarry or whatever, that they get off scot-free and the resident ends up bearing the whole cost of maintenance of the road, which is being used for heavy trucking by somebody else. So I think the easy fix for that is that the problem is when they got down to enforcement, they just said if a residential property owner fails to pay that owner's share. So you can see where I've added in red here, residential or in some, this is hard to tell. Yeah, it's actually where it's red, it's actually got a line through it. And my computer puts a line right along the top of the lowercase letters, so it's hard to see. But in the first paragraph there, I've crossed out residential property owner. It should be any property owner. And then down under enforcement, instead of saying if a residential property owner, I took out residential and put in any property owner.
And what will happen is the Small Woodlot Owners Association of Maine will come out at swinging and say, we go log our property once every 10 years and I don't need a maintained road. And so that could be a problem. Ryan, you're going to have to drop off soon. So are there some things you'd like to mention at this point for us before?
On the last point, Roberta, how does that, if we change this to any property owner, are we okay with the conflict paragraph that says in the event of any conflict between the provisions of this section?
Okay,
because
that shouldn't be a problem, because if there's already an existing road association or any kind of existing road agreement, then that takes precedence.
Okay.
The only time it goes to equal shares is when there isn't any other arrangement.
Okay, because I know in the road association stuff, I know that just a little bit, but there's a provision in there that you can only, the dues can only be a certain percentage of your assessed value if you don't have a building on it. So like in our case, our dues are $350 a year. And if someone has a vacant lot and their property isn't taxed at least $35,000,
right,
we can't charge them the $350.
Yeah, we run into that with my daughter's road association. There are several small undeveloped lots that are valued at under 35,000, and are under 30,000. Their dues are set at 300. So there are people that only pay 295, or that pay 116, or 1% of whatever their valuation is. But again, that would come under the existing road association.
Okay, so that makes sense.
And I think the main problem here is under that enforcement. That's where if somebody damages the road, I guess it doesn't say that. I'm going to put a note in for myself on that one too. if someone,
As Jim noted, I do have to drop off for another meeting, so thank you guys, and I'll see you next time.
All right, Ryan, we'll keep you
Hey,
posted.
Ryan.
Thanks.
thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, so that needs a little bit of work still.
The enforcement on this is the enforcement of the agreement, not the enforcement of any claim for damages. So that's, okay, I see. All right, so the next part is the right-of-way in 2053 in Title 29A. Is that?
Yep, 2053. My suggested revision on that one, for purposes of the subsection, a private entry means any entry or road access onto a public way from anything other than a public way, including a private road, alley, driveway, or entrance. And I find nothing in Maine statutes that defines an alley. I didn't search to see how many other places the word alley appears. It's pretty obvious that what they mean is if you're entering a public road from something that isn't a public road, you have to, stop, look both ways, and yield to traffic. So I think just change private way to private entry.
Or if you were to say entering a public way from any other way or from any way, because that has a really broad definition, as Pete pointed out.
Yeah.
That's where I said from anything other than a public way.
Yeah.
So you think that's okay?
I'm just throwing it out there as an idea, but it doesn't. It would mean a road, highway, parkway, street, or bridge used for vehicular traffic, whether public or private. That's pretty broad.
Mm-hmm.
Just use way.
Just use way as defined in 29A 101-92.
Well, that's the public ways. This is the question here is
Public or private.
That would be public or private.
Well, the question here is entering a public way from something that isn't a public way.
Right. Well,
Right.
Right. But
So way, you could say way, and that covers public and private.
Yeah, but what this statute is addressing is when someone is entering a public way from something that isn't a public way. And they're trying to say that, even though you're entering from something that isn't a public way, you still have to yield to the traffic on the public way. So that's why I put in from anything other than a public way or, a private entry. Okay, going on to the disclosure laws. The problem with the disclosure law is similar to the one above about the maintenance of a private road. The problem is that the realtors are having to go on what the landowner tells them.
mm-hmm.
And here again, we could have them be required to check the DOT site. I'm going to put that into my notes here. DOT site. Okay, then Title 23, Section 3101. Here they use the term private road all the way through the statute, but they also use private road or private way. So, and they define a private way as being a public easement. So why not take out private way and put in public easement if that's what they mean? The main problem here is in the heading of the whole chapter.
Yep.
They call it the Private Ways Act, And
Right.
really what it is the Private Roads Act. And I think if that got fixed, it would put people's focus in the right direction. Because now
Well,
some
you'd have-
people,
You'd have to do that. You'd also have to break out 3105A and 3106 as the Public Easements Act or something.
yeah, well, it also applies to private roads, but it's private roads that are also public easements. So I think there should be a way to do that, all right. But I've actually had people come to me and say, well, I can't use the Private Ways Act because our road isn't a public easement. And I have to tell them, no, it doesn't have to be a public easement to use this whole set of statutes here. It has to be a private road. And private ways are a subset that, it also sometimes applies to them, but mainly it deals with private roads.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that needs to be fixed.
Yeah. And then if you scroll down a little bit where I said suggested revision, I have subchapter private ways, and I crossed out ways and put in roads. And then most of the rest are okay until you get down to 3105A, and then cross out private ways and put in public easements.
Yeah, that's what it's meant to be.
Yeah. So that's it for private roads. So we ready to move on to private ways?
Let's go down that road.
Privately.
Okay, so private ways, and I'm going to bring up my version of it here so that I can make edits to it. Let's see, private ways. Okay, so you're now looking at the one that says Westlaw Private Ways Revision Suggestions Draft Work in Progress.
Yes.
And this one, the problematic ones really have some problems that are going to take some work. I did take a stab at the first one there, section 1903, as used in this chapter, Traveler Information Services. And I don't know if this is the right thing to do or not. I didn't put a whole lot of thought into this one. I just kind of, I felt like I wanted to have something here before I came to the meeting. So I just kind of stuffed this in there. Private way. The historic term private way was once used to refer either to a private road or driveway or to a public easement as defined in 23 MRS section 3021. In the former instance, it is being replaced, oops, I missed a letter D there, being replaced by the term private road, and in the latter instance, it is being replaced by the term public easement. I don't know if that's something that we want to do or not. It was just kind of a thought that I had in trying to untangle this problem.
Well, this relates to the second issue, or no, third issue in your private roads revision, and one that we talked about in the other context. So let's, it probably needs to be fixed, but let's think about how.
Right. And part of the issue is that what do you do when you have signs that say private way on them when what they mean is private road? You know, how do you untangle that? You can't go around and require all the towns to replace their signs.
No?
Okay, then I'm going to kind of skip through the next couple of them where if you scroll down, you'll see suggested revision, and then there's a blank. Okay, I get down to 29A section 101 definitions, and there is a suggested revision on that one. Is used in this title, private road. Take out way and put in road. Private road means a way privately owned and maintained for the purposes of access to adjoining lands over which the owner or owners may restrict public use or passage. And then I crossed out and includes a discontinued way even if a public recreation easement has been reserved. What I'm trying to get at here is what really is a private road? And I know when Mara was going through this with their attorneys that they consult with, John Cunningham said, don't try to define public road. It refers to too many different things. And I want to see if I can get back in touch with them and say, okay, can you name for me what the different things are so that we can make sure we include those in our definition? But this is my first stab at it.
That'll be a good research project for John. It'll keep him busy.
Yeah, with all his spare time.
Right.
Okay, then if we change that, it would also mean changing the other places that appear in that title. And there aren't a whole lot of them. But if we just change that from private way to private entry, then it would mean changing it in a few places in 2053, 2063, 2356. And then I'm not sure what to do with 2382 because I wasn't sure what that referred to. And Pete gave a stab at trying to explain that to me, and I'm not quite sure I still quite get it. I'm not sure where a state construction project would be doing anything on a private way, but I guess he said they might have to build a private way across somebody's private land temporarily as a detour. Did I get that right, Pete?
Yep. Yeah, this isn't used much at all.
Okay, so that's not a major problem then anyway.
Nope.
Okay, and then the rest of the statutes that use the term, I thought it was pretty clear that it either meant a privately owned road or it meant a public easement. And sometimes it meant one and sometimes it meant the other, but there weren't too many other places where there was a question of which it was. So what I did was I just listed the ones where I think it could just be changed to private road. And then I listed, if you scroll way down, I listed the ones, again, when you come to blueprint, it says the following terms of statutes, the term private way appears to apply to public easements. So in those, it could just be changed to public easements. And then in the following statutes, the term private way is ambiguous or will need further discussion. And there's just a few of those. So that's as far as I got with that. If you want to take your own time, if you have, and just check and see if you agree that where I said it's a private road, it really is a private road, and where I said it's a public easement, it really is a public easement.
Let's do that.
Do you want to go through it now, or do you want to take it as a homework assignment?
I'm hearing homework assignment. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah.
That works for me, because if we can end the meeting early, then it means I can go and pack onions and earn a little money for once.
Well, there we go. I think it's a win-win. But no, I think we made some progress, and we have some work to get through to get a report over to, and so let's see. I'm trying to think of what the easiest way is. If we're going to report our progress, what we talked about this afternoon, to the entire commission, what does that look like?
Say that again, Jim.
If we're going to report to the commission what progress we made on our terms this afternoon, what is that going to look like?
I can submit these as a draft, or I can make those few tweaks that we mentioned and then submit it as a draft.
So Jim, you said we have to report in January. Is that what I remember?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the commission's going to have a meeting next month, and we're going to give them a progress report. Okay, I know what I'll do. I'll do a memo to the commission as a progress report of what this committee did, and I'll send a draft around to all of you to take a look at. And I'll just try to summarize the big points. We can provide them with the materials that were submitted for this meeting. And if, Roberta, you want to make that a more complete memo, that's fine. If you want to think through things you didn't have time to finish.
Yeah, if I can just make at least those few changes that we discussed, then okay. I can send you that again.
All right. So it'll take me a few days to do that summary memo, but that's what I'll do, a summary memo that will, so we'll have all the materials that went to us, Pete's memo, Roberta's memo with these changes, my memo, and my cover memo to the entire commission, which is say, terms committee met, here's where we are, roughly. You know, nothing's final, but this is our progress report. This is what we were talking about. Here's where maybe where we're going, or maybe where we're stuck, and we can just briefly make that report to the whole commission for the next meeting. Sound okay?
Yep.
Yeah, and then Jim, are we supposed to, in this January thing, like I read it once, but now I can't remember what it says, but all right here, report. Shall review the terms, shall determine whether changes to current law would improve understanding with results of the study along with recommended legislation.
Yes.
So we're going to actually take what we've done here and actually push forward a bunch of suggested changes in statute.
Well, I know that at our last meeting, Carla Black asked, do we really have to submit legislation? And I think the answer is if we don't on this, we could give ideas, but then they'll come back to us and ask us for legislation. So one way or another, we got to do it.
Okay.
And after we've come up with the best solution that we can, we kind of have this, in joke that you work on a statute, polishing it for months, trying to take out any ambiguity and make it say exactly what it needs to say. And then they give it to the reviser of statutes, whose job is to revise it so it says something else.
Well, I don't know that their job is to make it say something else, but once you start the legislative process, just like once you file a lawsuit, you lose control over what happens, and someone else is going to make a decision.
Yeah. One thing that I have found is helpful is to make sure that the reviser of statutes knows who to get back in touch with if they have any questions about what you meant.
That's
so
true.
that they don't assume they know what you meant and change it so it doesn't say what you meant anymore.
We'll give them our email addresses, Roberta.
And I would think as a commission, we probably have a little more credibility than maybe some other groups.
Right.
Maybe, but that won't stop the office from revising whatever we say. Good answer. Okay. All right. Heather, thanks for your patience and guiding us through this. Pete, Roberta, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I'll send you a draft of my memo with all the comments and tell me what you think, okay?
Okay.
All
Okay,
right.
and I will send you the corrected version here shortly.
Perfect. Thank you all.
And I'll correct mine too, Jim, with a couple of things I needed to do.
Fair enough. Okay. Thanks.
All right. See you guys.